Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to live chat session number 26, Jugalbandi number 8. And here is, based on our topic of heritage music, etc. Here is a book that I was leafing through earlier today. Also based on some music I shared from Pidra with Jean Gardner yesterday, who is here. So let's bring her on board without wasting any time. This is so wonderful how everyone is here already, and it's fantastic. Here we go, waiting for her to accept. Hi Farouk, hi Zufi, good to see you guys. Fiza, hi Jean.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, no, wait, good evening there. Good afternoon here. Good afternoon.
Yes. So check this out. Saints
All
and
right.
singers, Sufi music in the Indus Valley.
Oh, heartbeats.
And I know, I thought you'd like that. And the musicians I sent you a link of yesterday, here they are.
Oh my gosh.
That's them playing in that location. There you go. So imagine those sounds not from YouTube, but actually in this environment. Look at that.
Yes, yes. Every place the human hand has molded that space reverberates the sounds from their voices.
Isn't that
And
beautiful? Look at that.
yes, it's just extraordinary. Extraordinary.
This is the same guys that were in the link that I sent you yesterday. They play there regularly, so they've been documented. This is a German author who made this book in the mid-90s. I happened upon it recently. It's not the most dense text, but it has beautiful photos, and it's a lovely little overview of what these two friends wandered through up and down the Indus Valley looking out for music. So based on our topic for today, I thought this would be a great book to flip through before we came on. And obviously there's audience here who can go and get their books from Karachi, from the OUP library if they want. And I will keep a copy for you, Jean, for when we meet, to take you through the Indus Valley civilization personally, on a personal edu tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have, as I said this morning, I've packed a very small bag.
Good.
And I've gotten Pegasus out of the stable and we're waiting. We're waiting for the right updraft. He doesn't really need an updraft.
Yes,
but it would be good to get on one of those currents in the air that goes around the earth. So we really, bypass all the securities and the airports and the terrible food. Yes, and we'll be there.
So if you give me 1 second, the sun is like bleaching through my face. Let me just turn this around a little bit. I'll be right back.
The sun wants to join us. Don't turn, the sun wants to join us.
The sun is being greedy. He needs to wait his time.
Wait his turn. Yeah, so that's true. That's true. It's almost the solstice. I do want us to remember.
That's true.
Here in Eastern Standard Time, it's Saturday around 5 p.m. But as the sun begins to reach this point where it turns,
right,
it slows down. And so even before that, there's a sense of this waiting. It's such a tremendous thing. The momentum of the sun, and the sun at this extraordinary place of extreme light, and then it's going to start its journey back to darkness.
We have a guest.
Guest
today.
And what's the name of the guest?
We have another guest. Say hello. Say hello to Jean. So interesting enough, this guest is called Mercury.
No, it's too much. It's too much.
Isn't that crazy? I have 4 cats, and the one that would be interested in our conversation today is Mercury. And the other one sitting not far from me next to the book is Rumi. So I have 2 perfect
too much.
The others are not
Mercury,
listed, but these two are right here.
but they're, Mercury is a messenger of the gods, and we definitely need that. And Rumi already, I have a calendar. Every month is a quote from Rumi and some wonderful paintings not by Rumi, to illuminate it. And the wisdom in Rumi's words, we could use that. Mercury, if he could carry those back and forth, we could just sit back.
There's a Rumi. I was going to show my copy of Rumi today, but I think it's on the other side. Anyway, so you've enjoyed the music I've sent you, which has been all sorts of strange things, from the poetess Meena Kumari to the fakirs at Bhidshah. Very difficult with the 6 or 8 men and their one-string instruments, really high-pitched voices that sort of pierce through you. You've seen some excerpts of the 6 drums, the Thamal at Sevan, where everybody's jumping up and down as they're losing their mortal connection to the ground and going into trance. So that's quite amazing.
The instruments that you described, what was it called that the Sufi chanters, what's that instrument that
that long sitar-like instrument is called an iktara. Iktara is 1 string. So it's just 1 string. It's an iktara.
Well, it gave the feeling, because they would pulse it. They would pulse it as if it was a drum, as well as strum it. So it was this amazing pulling on the heartstrings.
So they do the drumming on the body of the, of the instrument. My mistake. This is an iktara. I'll show you what I sent you yesterday is actually a 6-string instrument, and they make it 5 strings. I'll just show you that picture again. And the percussion comes by them hitting their hands on the actual body of the of the instrument.
That was what would really amaze me. Yeah, and the fact that they could strum your heart and then also pulse the beat of your heart simultaneously, and then the sound of their voices at a totally other harmonic level. It was, it really affected me.
It does that. It moves, and I was really interested to know, because some of the language we know, the history, the traditions of where the music is coming from. But for you, I was really curious to see how you would receive it without the building, without the context, without the clothes, without the humidity, the food, the drink, the language. I think all of these things play a role. And you've just been given this music in a vacuum. And I think maybe it was a little bit unfair for me to expect a reaction, but I knew your reaction would still be earthed, it would still be holistic. You would be able to place these musicians in your imagination where they belong. So I knew it wouldn't be that much of a stretch.
Deciphering future heritage sounds. So that's the name of today's
game.
Game, yes. And those musicians are such a powerful question that you ask. You've heard them live. I've heard chanting by people from your part of the world. I've heard Sufis and seen them whirling, the whirling dervishes, in St. John the Divine in New York City. And of course, it was made for different sounds. So this deciphering has seemed to me so pivotal in everything that we've been talking about. A cipher, a kind of code, something, that has to be taken apart, deciphered, interpreted. And like you said, the means is always different. even if you and I were standing there together listening, our bodies are not the same. The genetics of our body is not the same. I would imagine we experience heat in very different ways. So always the deciphering a person, it just seems to me it's so critical that each decipherer, the person who's trying to live, trusts their own body and the wisdom that their body holds as a opening. Like you said, well, you know, maybe it wasn't fair to me that I wasn't there, but I still heard them. And that's the contradiction of future and heritage. I don't have the same heritage that you do, although I'm beginning to think I do. And that has to do with the movement of people around the earth. But the important thing is I still have what we keep referring to as the geometry of my body is not in the same relationships as yours because you're much taller, but I have the same proportions. The portions are related to each other in a similar way. So why wouldn't the sounds, pulsing, strumming, come together through that channel? That's the only reason I don't like the word channel, because it makes it think of TV and channels on Slack and just channels. But I mean the same means, even if it plays out in such different ways. The deciphering and the sound seem to me to frame what you decided would be the focus today. Sound doesn't have to be in the wavelength that I can hear, which may be very different than your wavelength. So all that exists beyond audible, and then the deciphering of it. And you just sent me a link from an English source, the great colonist, telling us that scientists have heard the voice of a 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummy. Yes. Because they could figure out the shape of the vocal cords and the throat. So, woo! And then I, not to be outdone by you, I quickly said, can we hear the Big Bang? And the answer came back, yes, of course we can. So we can hear back to the beginning of the universe. So sound, it's the heritage, but it's also, I can't, the word future, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does future mean to you when you wrote that? Future, heritage, what do those two words mean?
So, future, the word future I find amazing because it's entirely meaningless. I think the future just like saying nice or how pretty. I think it's a complete non-word. It's entirely irrelevant because there is no such thing as the future as far as I'm concerned. And if you're not living in the now, you will never experience that what would be a future. And it's a whimsical distraction as far as I'm concerned. But the word decipher, I picked very, very carefully. I thought that through. It was my own little social experiment for us, because I don't think that we need to decipher. I think the need to decipher is man's lack of trust in the universe and the need to control. So to decipher music, I think what you experienced proves my point that we don't need to decipher it. It proves exactly, if you came back to me and said, I didn't feel anything, I didn't understand it, I need to be there, I need to understand how the harmonies work and how the music, the rags work. If you came back to me with 400 annoying questions, then I would have thought, okay, the deciphering makes sense. But you absorbed it and you had an emotional reaction to it, which proves my point that there is no deciphering required. When I heard this music for the first time, Gene, like you, I wasn't born listening to this. I wasn't born in that building with these musicians in front of me while my mother gave birth to me. It's not the first sound I heard. So there was a time when I also arrived at this type of sound as a virgin. I was an oral virgin. And there was a time when I didn't understand the tradition. I didn't know the tradition. I wasn't familiar with the instruments. And over time, my hearing has matured and gotten used to listening to these things. So now I can, if you sit 5 fakir bands in front of me, I'll tell you who's doing a better job. But in the beginning, they all sounded the same. Now, why I think they don't need to be deciphered, because you just said it. Our proportions are the same, which means we have the same amount of liquid running through our bodies that is required for that proportion. Which means that what I feel in that music is vibrating in my liquids. It's doing the same vibration in yours. We don't need to understand anything about it. And that's what makes Sufi music so non-denominational, because anybody can be emotionally moved by it. That is exactly the spirit of the Sufi thought, the music, that you don't need to understand the language, whether it's Saraiki or it's Farsi, whatever they're singing the Y, it's a W-I, it's called a Y. That song performance that you heard, yes, it's called a Y, W-A-I. You don't need to hear it. You were moved. Many times people will get up and they'll start dancing, they'll start moving it. Sometimes they will cry. Sometimes they will just move, just sway back and forth. But even the people who are afraid and they get up and leave, even that is a movement, even that is a response. There's nobody who sits through there thinking, oh my God, I need some more chewing gum. It just doesn't happen. You either love it and you can feel it as your sweat drips down your body. You can feel even those droplets moving to the music, or you just think this is too much and you get overwhelmed and you have to leave because it's suffocating your larynx and it's suffocating your system because you're so used to controlling it. So I'm not sure that music of this nature, or music that's heritage, and the same way we talked about the buildings, I think that the first reaction that one has to a heritage building, yours or mine or anybody's in between, that first-hand experience, as you have repeatedly mentioned, is something that cannot be duplicated in books. You have to get that holistic experience, and that's culture-free. That's language-free. It doesn't need to be deciphered. What we need to decipher are the technical things. What is the material of that instrument? What is the material of the building? When was it made? Irrelevant. Who made it? What you bring home with you doesn't need deciphering. I think it's free.
Well, you know that
Agree?
I agree fully. And trusting the resonance that is felt, and really almost instantaneously, so fast that in our distractions, often not even noticed, but it gets in there. And what I've been experiencing lately with the lockdown, which thank God has eliminated many, many distractions, going back and forth to New York City, all the extraordinary number of people that I would encounter every day. And I'm always curious about them. someone's standing, you know, and my face is in their chest on the subway, I want to talk to them. This is intimacy, and I can't let it go because my body's sort of saying, "Wow, look at that hunk." This has been a long time since I was that close to someone like this. Ooh, I gotta speak. And, you know, that's a distraction. Whatever I had on my mind is gone. And now with the lockdown, it's solitude relative. I have a family across the barnyard, but it's solitude. And talking about what the body has heard that we haven't given ourselves enough time to realize. So agreeing with you, you hear, it could be music coming out of a window as you walk by on the street. And you wonder, is this meant for me? Because it affects you, whatever. And when it's a sound like the Sufis and the solitude that I have, along with lots of wild birds and nosy wild turkeys and raccoons that, you know, want to be let in. So there's an awful lot of activity, but relative to New York, it's very quiet. I feel long ago a very deep sadness entered me, but I've never given it enough time to rise up. So it is rising up, but it's already in me. It long ago bypassed my heart, went into my breathing patterns, circulating around with the blood that has the oxygen that came into my heart and through the lungs. And so it's already here, it's already established. That, to me, is what the Sufi music draws out, setting up the pulsing rhythm that digs into these places that the sadness has taken refuge. But there's so many places that the pulsing and the strumming, they find them all. I'm basically confirming and thanking you for pulling the rug out from under Deciphering. That was sort of your bait. Okay, Jean, you're always looking up words. Let's see what you can do with Decipher. And then I'm going to say, what? Blow it away. Not intentionally, but that's the whole basis of Jugalbandi.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is that, you know, I'm thinking about these words because that's what you've taught me to now think about the word, deconstruct its semantics and see if there's any integrity to it. So I think future has no integrity. I think utopia has no integrity. These are all just like fairy tales that you tell children to appease them and just to cause distraction and get on with the conversation. But actually there's no conversation there. And heritage, as we were speaking about yesterday, so in all your solitude, you forgot to mention, other than the raccoons and the turkeys, all the interference that I create during the week in between these conversations, as people wanted to know what happens offline. I trouble Jill a lot. Everybody should know there's other conversations that happen. I bother her constantly, either on Messenger with material to read or YouTube links or on the phone. So she's not that isolated.
Well, that's true. That is true.
So, heritage. What we spoke about yesterday in terms of her-tige. So I think that, for me, is a very interesting genderification for that word, that because it has a her built into it, like a ship, like Noah's Ark, like any of these travel machines, they're all hers. When you break a bottle of champagne against a boat, against a yacht, they're all referred to as hers. And I think that heritage, if we break it down, for me, I love the idea that it is actually a mother figure. It is a nurturer. Our heritage buildings want to look after us. They want to nurture us. They want to share the information. They're not there to just be warriors. They're there to teach and have you grow and give you all of this material to enjoy. They want to empower you, enable you to play. So I think that for me, the term heritage as a matriarchal figure or a mother figure would be wonderful, because that's what we want to do. We want to go there and sit in her lap and fall asleep and listen to her stories and listen to her sing you old childhood folklore and folk tales, let you sleep, then you wake up and then you look around and she feeds you more information and you get lost in her magic and her mystery. So what could be better than the word heritage for the kind of things that we're looking at, whether it's food or it's music or it's the pottery or it's the buildings that I keep going back to. I think that for me is what makes the word heritage so alive.
And to remind us that I'm talking about the sound that's buried in words, the sound. So wanting to go back through cipher to the sound origin. Same thing with heritage. So it's the sound I'm looking for, listening for, searching for, at the same time that I have a lion's appetite of curiosity. So it gets mixed up, because the minute I start in relationship to what I have heard from you that has uncovered the Indus Valley for me, and this idea of her as the source, as the wellspring of early peoples, and the possibility that in the Indus Valley it was a matrilineal culture. And so, but nobody has been able to decipher, quote unquote, their writing.
Yes.
So it's not that they didn't write. So that's even more astounding. And it led me to wondering about the Lenape. I'm in the Lenape lands, but the records, quote unquote, these are written, only go back to the 17th century. So it goes back to when the Quakers came into this area and explorers. So before that, obviously Homo sapiens were wandering the earth long before the English saw them. So then I looked for the oral tradition of the Lenape, their creation story. And lo and behold, the Lenapes, who still exist, have collected these oral stories. And I was stunned at the parallels to our oral story of creation, meaning modern, not the place that you're from or the place I'm from, but what science tells us, the Big Bang. Of course, nobody knew what came before. The Lenape, it was darkness. And then out of the darkness, which they actually at least in the memories of people now writing down these stories, the darkness was a generative medium. So out of the darkness comes life. And you could say that easily about the Big Bang. Nobody knows what was before. There was definitely not space and time, because space and time came with the explosion. But then I think, well, Shiva, he was sound asleep. There was nothing going on. And then when he woke up, Shiva took on form. So out of this big question about what was before comes form. Same with the Lenape. Same with the Navajos. Same. Different sounds to explain what happened after the darkness or at rest. And then I thought, well, where did the Lenape come from anyway? Everyone came out of Africa. This is what we're told. So are these people who sprouted out of the earth, just like all of us are supposedly sprouted out of Africa? And I had my DNA done, and that seems to be the case. And then I began to wonder, well, moving out of Africa across the land masses, people either went to the east or the west. And if they went to the east, which is your direction, they would pass through the Near East, Asia, and then it now seems almost universally accepted. There was a landmass where the Bering Strait was. That's how they got across. And it's now been submerged not because of recent ocean rising, but the last glacier. I do not want to say the dates, but the story the scientists are saying is they crossed over. And this is the reason there's so many similarities between the Navajos, the Hopis, in their dress, in their language. And the peoples who went over, these are thousands of years of crossing over, living on the Bering Strait, because most lands were flooded. They not only went to the southwest, but they also went to the northeast. Okay, that's us, the Lenape. So I thought, oh, Zen is right. We are related. And no wonder everybody, was matrilinear. You had to know who your family or your clan was, because what else did you know? And we're piecing together the things that you said just a minute ago about what that meant to come into this planet basically through this nurturing medium. That's, I think, the question that should be foremost for me when we say, what are we doing right now? What are we doing? Yelling and screaming at each other in the streets, bearing all the pain that all of the polarization has at last made visible. So, heritage. And I suddenly had a vision of my feet standing back there in the heritage. Like the heritage was this, matrix, a swamp, a marsh, the lotus coming out. And, we're half in the mud. And now we're coming out. Can we keep aligned with, I imagine, what so many people are feeling now? But I don't want to speak for anyone.
Yeah, it's as they would have said in Alice in Wonderland. The time, I would say it's curiouser and curiouser. So every day we find a new tunnel through the rabbit hole. And one can choose to be depressed and afraid, or one can choose to explore and be open to unknowns around the corner in that curiouser and curiouser condition. So I think, you know, so Alice in Wonderland makes more sense to me than Shakespeare. But it's a time for inflection, reflection, and a great opportunity to think about what's really happening. And I think it's quite wonderful to be alive at a time when there's such dramatic change happening. I feel like I'm going to watch all the dinosaurs get wiped out. And I mean that metaphorically, because I think it is time for the dinosaurs to get wiped out, for new blood to come up and for new greenery to be sprouting up. We have been dominated by these difficult to move ideas, and we've been made to believe that these are ideas, solutions, systems of wealth and freedom and independence and inclusivity, and it's now proving to crumble in and of itself. So I think that's quite wonderful to watch, this implosion happening of all these great systems that have been so arrogant about their permanence and that they would only keep building. But of course, the taller it gets, the more likely it's going to collapse.
Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel. So, and there we have it. You know, that's an amazing example. So I think it's quite phenomenal to be alive right now, to be actually not only be witnessing this transition, but to be potentially a part of it, to be able to make some, to add some content into that transition. However unsure of itself it may be, and young and immature, and, but it's fresh, and I think that there's a lot of tragedy all around us, undoubtedly. Tragedy in the oceans, tragedy in the skies, in urban cities, in the palm tree plantations. It continues in the zoos across the world, in people's homes, the animals, with plants, with the land, the bottom of the ocean. I think the safest place to be right now is probably in the Mariana Trench with the giant squid, away and sort of come out of it when it's all finished and sorted out. So, you know, we see elephants, captive elephants, dying or being brutally killed every day. So the story of the Homo sapien is over. I think there's a book that I keep seeing people are reading on the Homo sapien, and I don't understand what is it that they need to know that they can't see around them. Like, what else do you need to know about this creature? I mean, they're the worst piece of design as far as I'm concerned in the food chain. So everybody's reading this book, and I'm always amused by it. Like, what do you think that book will tell you that you don't already know about your species? So I think listening to the sound of change. There's a great book written by Herman Wouk called The Winds of War. And I think that would be a book to revisit. Malia Mungu, hi. She's joined us. Jumbo to you too. So I think the sound of the present is what is more important and interesting. I mean, how far back does heritage go? How far back should the memory of our sound take us? So when you walk by that window and there's music playing, it may resonate, it may not. And if it resonates, it might resuscitate a memory that you had pushed back, and it'll make that memory come forward, even though it has no connection to that memory. but that vibration in your body liquids cause that memory to come back. This music was playing for somebody else for their own purpose, coming out of a window in Florence, in New York, in St. Petersburg. It could be Russian pop. It could have been German rap. It could have been French hip hop. It could have been Sufi music coming out of a street in Hyderabad that you walk past. And it may remind you of the whirling dervishes at St. John the Divine. The two were not meant to connect with each other, but you connected them and brought them alive. So that sound travels with you because it's brought that memory back out. It's left its original owner. It now has a new owner, your memory. And it continues that way. So I think our heritage, like the landmass and the people moving, does the same with the sound. You know, the buildings, which I keep saying that the design has traveled. None of it is unique. It's all come through some other travel. It's rolled like tumbleweed through desert, and it's gathered moss and it's gathered ideas. So the sound does the same. It gathers influences and then brings it out in some other person's story. And then we have a new story that's created.
Well, this is a deep well of water. And as we know, from the deep well of water comes the Orphic voices of the earth. And for centuries, we go to those sounds, just like you're saying. Now they may come from a window and you have no idea who has put those sounds out into the world. For me, the opportunity is in how I see and understand. If we want a systemic change, a shift, a realignment, the system has to originate within each of us. It can't be imposed. So in the situation that you have made such a difference, and the elephant being a recent example, cruelty to animals, the habits that each of us have, that's where it has to start changing. I've been getting so many email alerts. Sign this petition, sign that, tell this elected official that. But never saying, how am I going to change my own personal systems as they ripple out toward this objective? And in the situation I'm referring to in relation to your habits that led to the possibility of being asked to write about this elephant. So you're being asked to give voice in our modern culture, which does not understand that the elephant has a voice. And it's equal to the enormity of what we call Africa, just like the whale's voice is equal to the size of the oceans. And we're interrupting that voice. But you've been called on to give voice. And that, to me, when I see that, meaning understand it, stand under it, means that systemically there are habits. Actually, here I go again. The word habit, believe it or not, means to give and receive. In other words, a habit that you have in relationship to what ends up to be this elephant that's been so mistreated, the elephant's going to receive it, and then something's going to be given back. We don't think of habits that way. We think, oh, somebody has a habit of smoking too much. We don't realize enough until recently that that smoke is going out into the atmosphere and it's being received by people who don't smoke. So we've been talking about changing our habits, the things that we do now that we feel have reverberations that could make a difference in the enabling of alternative relationships between everything, not just between one group of Homo sapien and another, but between all forms of life. And I extend the idea of life out to the universe, not stopping at what often is the end point. So in your case, can you even begin to articulate how that dynamic came into being, that you would be asked to write this letter? So there are habits you have that send out waves in this well that we're all in, reverberations. And who knows, the elephant may have heard and responded. Then I need you. And it made its way through all the channels, the authorities, those people in charge, and you gave a voice to that elephant. So I'm trying to say, habits, the giving and the receiving, is to me where my responsibility is right now, when this huge crack in the universe with so much light coming in, and on Saturday there's going to be the greatest amount of light when the sun moves into what we call the solstice. Thoughts? Do you have any thoughts?
It's funny you should, I hadn't thought about this, but the elephants at Karachi Zoo, when I started work on designing the Karachi Zoo, every time I go to the zoo, Jean, even now, that night, I'm not able to sleep. And it's partly because of a physical disturbance of the way they're living and thinking, gosh, that could be me. And it's partly because I come back, I can go on my own and just have a quiet, silent visit. But actually, I come back with so many messages that my mind is just buzzing all night. And I've always thought that the elephants were the masterminds behind my presence there, and any work that we did. I was convinced that it was the elephants, even though they were probably the younger of the animals that I was interacting with. And I remember going into the cage. There's a tigress there who's, I think, 19 years old, called Rachel. And I remember going into Rachel's cage while she was on one side being fed, and the zoo keepers said, you can go in, that's fine, we'll go in with you to make sure nothing happens. But they couldn't understand why I wanted to go inside the cage. And for me, it seemed so obvious that if I was going to design a house for you, I'd like to come and see how you're living. It's the most obvious. You do a site visit inside your house. So if I'm designing a house for you, I'm not going to stand outside and tell you how you should live. I'm going to come inside and see what your problems are and what you need help with. So I wanted to see what their view was like, how they looked at us, and what was that lens looking out. And of course, it was disturbing, and it was another night that I didn't sleep. But I find that there is more sound in silence and more noise in sound. That is something that I'm beginning to realize, that the animals, even though they make sounds, their real communication is not through that language. And it's the same with the buildings. And it's the same with this music. It's not actually what my ear is hearing that's changing something in here. That emotional reaction is coming from something in between each of those notes. The reason it was created, the hundreds of people that it's been through, the hundreds of energy sources, spirits, love, loss, pathos, tears, joy, laughter that it's been through. I think that's what we hear. It's not the actual noise that the instrument makes. It's the sound of its spirit that we absorb. And I find that I'm learning so much more about all of these things by just keeping my noise as invisible as possible, as uninterfering, as non-imperialist on that moment in time as possible. And when we arrive at some of these forts and locations, when I tell our guys to keep quiet and listen to things, even the people who you think would laugh at you, even they're moved, and they do listen and they hear. And I see the shift in their energy. Somebody who may be sort of boisterous and, Mr. Cool, or, the girl that's super popular that everybody wants access to, suddenly there's a shift in their demeanor because they've sat on the earth and stopped the noise. So I think it's a great time to also, I wish the word sound and the word noise would have just flipped across and become back to front and been the same word. So if you would read, I'd love to be able to read sound backwards and have it be noise, but it's not. And I think that we're in a very delicate time, very fragile time, where sound is becoming noisy, and the noise is distracting from clarity of thought, from being surgical about the kind of actions we each need to make to participate in this global movement into a new. And I think that, like the Pied Piper, the interesting thing for me about the Pied Piper is the sound on the earth of all the little mice, all their feet following him. Nobody talks about the mice making any noise. It's just his noise we hear about, that he had a flute. But imagine the reverberation under the earth, on the earth, with hundreds of little feet all heading in one direction. And the sound they would have made as the water received them. So I think Decipher we throw out the window, future we throw out the window, and we start decluttering our own semantics. Our semantics are so cluttered with jargon. It's noise, white noise. Remember that great book?
Yes, yes.
So I think about that. I lent my copy to somebody and it's gone, but I think about that book and that sticks in my head. We are living that white noise. And I think in many ways that white noise is modernism's colonial oppressor. I've said this to you before, that I find modernity very oppressive and very rigid. That whole falling water example, I was just so horrified at the noise in this building. So that's what I think about where I'm at in terms of the sound of silence being more rich and sounds just being noisy.
I've felt for a long time, and from knowing within myself, not projecting, that the noise is the reverse that you're talking about. Again, reminding ourselves that those two English words can be distracting, but just the noise that we're all making is actually a cry for help.
Right.
And the crying is because we know, and here I'm speaking by overcoming the paradox that somehow the individual and the collective are oppositional. Just like the elephant, the single elephant's pain spoke to you about all animals caged. So the noise that we all are making is collectively arising out of a cry for help, a nameless fear, and no mirror to see the source in ourselves. Abandoned, that's one of my continual dreams, and I understand from those who can look beyond my presence today that it's a very ancient experience. Abandoned by what? Like you've been saying, like I've experienced and you've experienced. If you stand on the earth, if you sit on the earth, you feel that maternal connection that you're talking about. If you look at the stars at night and feel the patterns, connected, we just don't take the time to experience it. And the pandemic, once, I don't know whether we can stop the noise, we'll find a vaccine, and look at what we've done, because we're so afraid to understand that the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the energy, the sun's energy distorted through fossil fuels, that all of these are why we're disconnected, because they're all toxic. Afraid to breathe because we're breathing in toxics, afraid to drink because we're drinking in toxics, afraid to eat because the soil is now totally dead and filled with toxic fertilizers. And we don't use the energy of the sun, we burn up fossil fuels. So reconnecting, realizing that we have to, not have to, that's a command. Just listen, like we've been talking about. Listen, stop, feel that stranger who's entered your being, the sadness I spoke about, and let it become, the fact that it's already part of us, let it become a source of courage.
On which note we'll have to stop, Jean. And
perfect
No.
ending.
It's a beautiful way to end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Go enjoy your silence, language of love. Thank you for joining us. We'll speak to you soon. Khuda Hafiz from Karachi.